The space station called Meridian's Rest floated in the darkness between 3 solar systems, and it had done so for more than 300 years, serving as a meeting place for dozens of alien species who came to trade and work and live together in what they called Galactic Harmony. Myra Chum stepped off the transport shuttle with a single bag over her shoulder and her heart beating fast inside her chest, because she was the first human intern ever assigned to the Xenobiology Liaison Office. And she knew that everyone would be watching her to see if humans were worthy of joining galactic society. The corridors of the station stretched out before her like the veins of some enormous creature, and aliens of every shape and size moved through them without paying her much attention, though a few turned their heads to stare at the small human woman with black hair and brown eyes who walked among them like she belonged there. She found the office on level 47. A wide room filled with desks and screens, and the quiet hum of technology she did not fully understand. And standing in the middle of it all was her new supervisor, a cowboy named Torvak, who towered over her by at least 2 feet and had skin the color of blue stone. "You are the human," he said. And it was not a question. "Yes, sir," Myra replied. And she held out her hand in the human gesture of greeting. But Torvak only looked at it and then turned away. "Your desk is in the corner," he said over his shoulder. "And your job is to enter data into the system and nothing more. Because humans are too young a species to understand the complexities of galactic relations. And I will not have you causing problems during my final year before retirement." Myra wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she had graduated at the top of her class and had studied xenobiology for 6 years and had dreamed of this moment since she was a child watching ships leave Earth's atmosphere. But she said nothing and walked to her desk in the corner and sat down. The desk was old and the chair was uncomfortable, and the screen in front of her displayed thousands of files that needed to be sorted and organized. And Myra understood that this was meant to be a punishment, a way of showing her that humans were not welcome here, no matter what the official treaties said. She worked in silence for the first 3 hours, entering data about cargo shipments and species registrations and diplomatic meetings that had happened years ago. And none of her colleagues spoke to her or even looked in her direction. But Myra was not the kind of person who gave up easily during her lunch break. She ate at her desk instead of going to the station's food court. And as she chewed on the protein bar she had brought from Earth, she heard something strange coming from above her head. It was a scratching sound, soft and quick, like small claws moving across metal. She looked up at the ceiling and saw the ventilation grate directly above her workstation. And for just a moment, she thought she saw something move behind it. "Excuse me," she said to a Varax colleague who was passing by, a being with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. "What is that sound coming from the vents?" The Varax did not stop walking but answered without turning around. "Atmospheric calibration drones. They move through the system to maintain air quality. Ignore them and do your work." Myra nodded and returned to her screen. But she did not ignore them over the next week. She paid careful attention to the sounds above her desk, and she noticed that they did not follow any pattern that a drone would follow, because drones were machines and machines were predictable. But these sounds came and went at random times, and sometimes stopped completely when someone walked near her corner of the office. She also noticed the heat. Myra had always been sensitive to temperature, a trait her mother said came from her grandmother, who could tell when a storm was coming just by the way the air felt against her skin. And the air above her desk was warmer than the air in the rest of the office, just by a few degrees, but enough for her to feel it on her 8th day at the station. She stayed late after everyone else had gone home, pretending to work on her data entry while actually watching the ceiling with careful eyes. The lights in the office had dimmed to their nighttime setting, and the only sound was the hum of the station systems. And Myra sat perfectly still in her chair and waited. An hour passed, and then another. and she was about to give up and return to her small quarters on level 12 when she saw them, two golden eyes, bright as stars, peering down at her through the gaps in the ventilation grate. They were not the eyes of a drone. Myra did not move, did not breathe, did not do anything that might scare away whatever was hiding up there in the darkness. And for a long moment, the eyes stared at her, and she stared back. Then they vanished, pulling away into the shadows of the ventilation system. And the scratching sound moved rapidly away until Myra could no longer hear it. She sat alone in the dark office with her heart pounding and her mind racing, because she knew what she had seen. Even if she could not yet prove it, something was living in the ceiling above her desk, something small and scared and hiding from the world. And Mira-chan, the human intern that nobody wanted, had just become the only person on the entire station who knew it was there. She gathered her things and walked to the door. But before she left, she turned back and looked up at the ceiling one more time. "I see you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I am not going to tell anyone. Not until I understand what you are and why you are hiding." The ventilation system was silent, but Myra could feel the warmth still lingering in the air above her desk, and she knew that somewhere up there, golden eyes were watching her. Gauche smiled and stepped out into the corridor and walked toward her quarters with a new purpose burning in her chest. Because for the first time since she had arrived on Meridian's Rest, she had found something that mattered more than proving herself to aliens who did not want her there. She had found a mystery, and humans had always been good at solving those. Myra spent every free moment she had in the station's public database, searching for information about species with golden eyes and small bodies that might hide in ventilation systems. She found her answer on the third night of searching, and when she saw the images on her screen, her breath caught in her throat. The Drelethi were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, massive creatures that looked like the dragons from Earth's ancient myths, with scales that could turn aside laser fire and wings that could carry them through the vacuum of space itself. But the pictures she found were not of the adults. She had discovered a restricted file about Dralith reproduction, and what she read there changed everything she thought she knew. Dralith hatchlings were born small, no bigger than a large dog, and for the first 2 years of their lives, their scales remained soft and vulnerable, which meant they could be hurt or killed by things that would not even scratch an adult of their species. This period was called the soft scale time, and during it, Dralith parents guarded their young with a ferocity that had become legend across the galaxy. The file also contained a warning that made Myra's heart ache with sadness. Dralith culture forbade outsiders from raising their young under any circumstances, and if a hatchling's parents died during the soft-scale time, the child was meant to be taken by other Dralith and raised within the species. But the Dralith Empire had fallen 3 generations ago, and their people were now scattered across 1,000 worlds. And sometimes there were no other Dralith to take the orphan child in those cases. The file said, "The hatchling often died alone." Myra closed the database and sat in her small quarters with tears running down her face, because she thought she understood now what was hiding in the ceiling above her desk. She pulled up the station's personnel records, which she was not supposed to have access to, but had figured out how to reach using skills she had learned as a teenager on Earth. And she searched for any Dralith who had worked on Meridian's Rest in the past year. There was only one name: Kasara, a structural engineer who had been assigned to the station's maintenance division, had died in an accident in the lower levels 8 months ago. And her file listed no family members and no next of kin. No hatchling had ever been registered. But Mira knew the truth. Nakazara had hidden her child somewhere on the station before she died, probably in the ventilation system, where the warmth from the environmental controls would keep the baby alive. And for 8 months, that little creature had been surviving alone in the darkness, eating whatever it could find and hiding from everyone who might discover it, because if it was discovered, it would be taken away and given to Dralith authorities. And Mira did not know if those authorities would protect it or harm it. But she knew that the hatchling had chosen to hide rather than reveal itself. And that choice meant something the next morning. Mira went to the station's market district before her shift began, and she used almost all of the credits she had saved to buy a package of protein supplements designed for reptilian species. She chose the ones that matched the nutritional requirements listed in the Dralith file, and she carried them back to the office in her bag, hidden beneath her personal belongings. When she reached her desk, she pretended to work for an hour until the office became busy with the morning rush. And then she quietly opened her bag and removed a small portion of the protein supplement and placed it on top of the ventilation grate above her head. She had to stand on her chair to reach it, and she pretended she was adjusting the airflow settings when a colleague glanced in her direction. That night, after everyone had gone home, she stayed late again and checked the grate. The food was gone. Myra smiled and felt warmth spread through her chest, and she placed another portion on the grate before she left. This became her routine for the next 3 weeks. Every morning, she would arrive early and place food on the grate, and every night she would stay late and find it gone. And slowly she began to buy better food with higher nutritional content, spending more and more of her meager intern salary on a creature she had never actually seen up close. Her colleagues thought she was strange, staying late every night and arriving early every morning, but they already thought humans were strange, so they paid her no attention. On the 15th night, Myra decided to try something new. Instead of leaving immediately after placing the food, she sat down at her desk and turned off her screen and waited in the darkness. And she spoke softly to the ceiling above her head. "I know you are up there," she said, and her voice was gentle and calm. "I know you have been alone for a very long time, and I know you are scared." The scratching sound stopped. "I am not going to hurt you," Myra continued, "and I am not going to tell anyone about you, because I think someone put you up there to keep you safe, and I want to help keep you safe too." Silence filled the office, heavy and complete. "You do not have to come down," she whispered. "You do not have to trust me, but I want you to know that you are not alone anymore. Not if you do not want to be." She waited for an hour, but nothing happened. And finally she gathered her things and went home. But the next morning, when she arrived at the office, she found something sitting on her desk. It was a small piece of metal, twisted and bent, the kind of scrap that might be found in a ventilation system. And it had been placed directly in the center of her workspace, where she would be sure to find it. Myra picked it up and held it in her palm, and felt tears threatening to fall from her eyes. It was a gift the hatchling had left her, a gift. She looked up at the ceiling and smiled, even though she knew the golden eyes were probably not watching right now. And she whispered 2 words that she hoped would travel through the metal and reach the small scared creature hiding in the darkness. "Thank you." From that day forward, the scratching sounds above her desk became more frequent. And sometimes, when the office was empty and the lights were dim, Mira would feel warmth on the top of her head, as if something was lying directly above her on the other side of the grate, keeping her company while she worked. She began to talk to the ceiling regularly, telling the hidden creature about her day and her life on Earth and her dreams for the future. And she never knew the hatchling understood her words, but she hoped that the sound of her voice was a comfort to something that had been alone. For far too long, Mira-chan had come to Meridian's rest to prove that humans belonged in the galaxy, but now she had found something more important than belonging. She had found someone who needed her. 3 weeks passed, and Myra's life fell into a rhythm that revolved around the hidden creature in the ceiling. She would wake early and prepare food for the hatchling. then go to work and spend her day entering data while speaking softly to the ventilation grate above her head. And at night she would stay late and sit in the darkness and wait, hoping that someday the golden eyes would trust her. Enough to come closer. That day came on a cold station night when the environmental systems had malfunctioned on the upper levels and sent a chill through the entire office. Myra was sitting at her desk, wrapped in a blanket she had brought from her quarters. When she heard the ventilation grate creak above her head, she looked up and saw small claws pushing at the metal from the inside. And then the grate swung open on hinges that should have been sealed shut. And something dropped down onto her desk with a soft thump. The hatchling was smaller than Mira had expected, about the size of a medium dog, with scales that shimmered between gold and copper. In the dim light of the office, its eyes were huge, taking up almost a third of its face, and they glowed with the same golden light that Myra had seen through the grate all those weeks ago. Its wings were small and pressed tight against its body, too underdeveloped for flight, and its tail curled around its feet as it sat on her desk and stared at her with an expression that Mira could only describe. "Hello," Myra whispered. And she did not move, did not reach out, did not do anything that might scare the creature away. "You came down." The hatchling made a sound, a soft chirping noise that seemed to come from deep in its throat. And it took one small step toward her across the surface of the desk. Myra could see now how thin it was, how its scales had lost their shine in places, how its eyes were too bright against its gaunt face. 8 months of surviving on scraps and station vermin had taken a terrible toll on this small creature. "You must be so hungry," Myra said. And slowly, carefully, she reached into her bag and pulled out the food she had brought. A high-quality protein mixture that cost her half a week's salary. And she placed it on the desk between them. The hatchling looked at the food and then looked at her. And Mira could see the war happening behind those golden eyes. The desperate hunger fighting against the fear that had kept this creature alive for so long. "It is safe," Myra promised. "I have been feeding you for weeks, remember? And nothing bad has happened." The hatchling chirped again and then moved forward and began to eat. And Mira watched with tears in her eyes as the small creature devoured the food with a speed that spoke of long starvation. When it was finished, the hatchling looked up at her and made a different sound, a low rumbling that vibrated through the desk. And Mira recognized it from her research as a Dralith expression of gratitude. "You are welcome," she said. "And there is more where that came from, as much as you need, for as long as you need it." The hatchling tilted its head, studying her with those enormous eyes. And then it did something that broke Myra's heart and healed it at the same time. It crawled across the desk and climbed into her lap and curled up against her stomach and closed its eyes. Myra sat perfectly still, barely breathing, as the small creature settled against her and let out a long sigh that carried 8 months of loneliness and fear and exhaustion. She did not know how long she sat there, in the dark office with the hatchling sleeping in her lap. But at some point she began to cry, silent tears rolling down her cheeks as she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened to this child. Its mother had hidden it to protect it, and then its mother had died, and the hatchling had been alone ever since, surviving in the darkness, too scared to come out, too young to understand why its parent never came back. But it was not alone anymore. Myra began to make plans. She could not keep the hatchling in the ventilation system forever, because station security would eventually notice the heat signatures and investigate. And she could not take it back to her quarters because the monitoring systems would detect the presence of an unregistered life form. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere hidden, somewhere warm. She remembered passing an unused storage room on level 32 during her first week on the station, a room that had been sealed due to a minor radiation leak that had long since been cleaned up. but never officially cleared for use. She had the access codes because she had been copying data from old maintenance files, and she knew that no one ever went down there. The next night, she carried the sleeping hatchling through the empty corridors of the station, moving carefully to avoid the security patrols. And she brought it to the storage room and made a nest for it out of blankets and cushions she had purchased from the market. The hatchling woke when she set it down, and it looked around the room with wide eyes, and Myra could see that it understood this was a new home, a safe place where it could sleep without fear. "I will come every day," she promised, kneeling beside the nest. "I will bring food and water, and I will stay with you as long as I can." The hatchling chirped and pressed its head against her hand, and Myra felt its scales, still soft at the edges, warm against her skin. She came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, and slowly she began to learn how to care for a Drellith child. She learned that it liked to be read to, even though it could not understand the words, and she learned that it was scared of loud noises and bright lights, and she learned that it made a particular sound when it was happy that was like a song and a purr combined. She also learned something important from the hatchling's behavior, something that explained why Kisara had hidden her child rather than trusting the Drellith authorities to care for it. Hatchling was scared of other Drellith when Ramera mentioned the species name. The creature would shake and press itself against her and make sounds of distress. And Mira began to suspect that Kisara had not died in an accident after all. Someone had killed her, someone from her own species, and that someone was still looking for the child she had hidden away. Myra held the trembling hatchling against her chest and whispered promises into the darkness of the storage room, promises that she would protect this small creature no matter what, promises that she would find out the truth about what had happened to its mother. She did not know how she would keep those promises, but she knew that she would die trying. The door to the storage room opened behind her, and Myra spun around with the hatchling clutched against her chest, ready to fight or run or do whatever she had to do to keep this child safe. But she froze when she saw who was standing in the doorway. It was Torvak, her supervisor, his blue stone face unreadable in the dim light of the room. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" "Human," he said, and his voice was flat and cold and gave nothing away. Myra held the hatchling tighter and lifted her chin and met his eyes without flinching. "Yes," she said, "I have done what needed to be done." Torvak stood in the doorway for a long moment, his eyes moving from Myra to the hatchling and back again. And Myra could not read the expression on his face because Kelmori did not show emotion the same way humans did. "You have hidden an undocumented juvenile of a protected species," he said. "You have violated at least 6 sections of the Galactic Compact, and you have done so while serving as a representative of humanity during your species' probationary period." Myra felt her heart sink into her stomach, because she knew what this meant. If Torvak reported her, she would be arrested and sent back to Earth in disgrace, and the hatchling would be taken by the authorities and handed over to the Drellith Remnant Council. And whoever had killed Kesara would finally get what they wanted. "Please," she said, and she hated the way her voice shook. "Please do not do this." Torvak stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, and in the dim light his blue skin seemed to glow with an inner fire. "I have been watching you," he said, "since your first day in my office. I have been watching you stay late and arrive early and talk to the ceiling like a person who has lost her mind." "You knew." Myra breathed. "I suspected," Torvak corrected. "And when I reviewed the security footage and saw you carrying something wrapped in blankets through the corridors at night, I became certain." He moved closer, and Myra backed away until she felt the wall against her shoulders, the hatchling trembling in her arms. "I could report you right now," Torvak said. "I could end your career and your species." membership in the compact with a single communication to the authorities. Then why have you not done it already? Myra asked. And she was surprised to hear anger in her voice. Instead of fear, Tuvok was silent for a moment. And then he did something that shocked Myra more than anything else that had happened since she arrived on this station. He smiled. Because I am not a monster, he said. And because I remember what happened to Kisara. Even if the official records say it was an accident, Myra stared at him, her mind racing to understand what he was telling her. Kisara came to me 2 weeks before she died, Tuvok continued. She told me that members of her own species were hunting her. A faction called the Purifiers who believed her bloodline carried a genetic marker that needed to be eliminated. Eliminated, Myra repeated. And the word tasted like poison in her mouth. The Dralith have many secrets, Tuvok said. And some of those secrets are ugly beyond measure. Factions that believe in purity of blood and will kill to protect their twisted beliefs. He looked at the hatchling in Myra's arms, and his expression softened in a way she had never seen before. Kisara asked me to help her hide her child, he said. But before I could arrange anything, she was dead, and her daughter had vanished. And I assumed the Purifiers had found them both. She hid her in the ventilation system, Myra said. Above my desk, Tuvok nodded slowly. And you found her. And you have been caring for her all this time. Spending your own money, risking your own future. For a creature that is not even your own species. She needed someone, Myra said simply. And I was there. Tuvok studied her for a long moment. And then he made a decision that would change everything. I am required by law to report this, he said. But the law also requires that a hearing be held before any protected juvenile is transferred to species authorities. And at that hearing, you will have the right to speak. What good will that do? Myra asked. The Dralith will demand her back, and the compact will give her to them. Perhaps, Tuvok said. Unless you can find a legal argument that convinces the Arbiter otherwise. He turned toward the door, but paused before opening it. I have heard that humans have interesting laws about the care of children, he said. Laws that recognize the rights of those who act as parents, even when they are not related by blood. And then he was gone, and Myra was left alone with the hatchling and a spark of hope burning in her chest. She spent the next 3 days researching human law, searching through databases that had been uploaded to the Galactic Network as part of humanity's application to the compact. And finally, she found what Tuvok had been hinting at in Loco Parentis, the legal principle that someone who has taken on the role of a parent has the rights and responsibilities of a parent. Even without biological connection, it had never been applied across species lines before. But the Galactic Compact's founding documents stated that all legal traditions of member species would be given equal consideration in matters of dispute. Myra filed her claim the morning before the hearing, and the news spread through the station like fire. Through dry grass, the first human intern was challenging the Dralith Remnant Council for custody of one of their own. Young representatives began arriving the next day. Dralith ships docking at the station's outer ring, their massive forms casting shadows across the observation windows. As they passed, Myra saw them and felt fear coil in her stomach. But she also felt something else, something stronger. She felt determination. The hearing was held in the station's central chamber, a vast room designed to accommodate species of all sizes. And Myra walked in with the hatchling in her arms and faced a wall of Dralith adults who stared at her with eyes full of contempt. At the center of the Dralith delegation sat a female with scales the color of dried blood. And Myra knew, without being told, that this was a purifier. One of the ones who had killed Kisara and was now here to finish what they had started. The Arbiter was a Varax elder, ancient and patient, with 4 arms that moved constantly as she reviewed the documents before her. We are here to determine the custody of an unnamed Dralith juvenile, the Arbiter said. The Dralith Remnant Council claims her as clan property, while the human Mira Chun claims parental rights under the doctrine of in loco parentis. The blood-scaled Dralith rose to her feet. This is an insult to our species. A human cannot claim rights over a Dralith child. Our laws are clear. Your laws will be considered, the arbiter said calmly, as will the laws of humanity. The arguments went back and forth for hours. The Dralith insisting that their traditions gave them absolute authority over their young, Mira countering that she had acted as the child's parent for months and had the right to continue doing so. But in the end, the arbiter raised one of her 4 hands for silence and asked the only question that mattered. Does the child have any preference? Every eye in the chamber turned to the hatchling in Myra's arms, and Myra felt the small creature press closer against her chest. Trembling with fear, the blood-scaled Dralith laughed. She cannot speak. She is not yet 2 years old. Dralith young do not develop speech until age 3. Everyone knows this. The arbiter looked at Mira. Is this true? Mira looked down at the hatchling, at those golden eyes that had watched her through the ventilation grate all those months ago. And she made a decision. She set the child down on the floor in front of her and knelt beside her and spoke in a voice that carried through the silent chamber. You do not have to say anything, she said. But if you want to stay with me, I need you to try. The hatchling looked at her, and then looked at the wall of Dralith adults staring down at them. And Myra could see the fear in those golden eyes. The same fear that had kept this child hidden for 8 months, but she could also see something else. She could see courage. The chamber was silent as the hatchling stood on the cold floor between Myra and the wall of Dralith adults, who had come to claim her 10,000 years of recorded history. Said that Dralith young could not speak before the age of 3, that their vocal cords were not developed enough, that the language centers of their brains needed more time to form. 10,000 years of certainty pressed down on this small creature who had been alone in the darkness for 8 months, who had watched her mother leave and never come back, who had survived on scraps and fear and the desperate hope that someone would find her. The blood-scaled Dralith laughed again, a cruel sound that echoed through the chamber. You see, the human is delusional. The child cannot speak, and even if she could, a juvenile cannot overrule the will of her species. Myra felt tears burning in her eyes because she had asked too much. She had placed an impossible burden on a child who had already suffered more than any creature should have to suffer. But then the hatchling opened her mouth. The sound that came out was broken and rough, like stones grinding against each other, like a voice that had never been used before, struggling to form shapes it did not know how to make. Ma, the hatchling said. The chamber went completely still. Ma, the hatchling said again, and her golden eyes were locked on Myra's face, and there was something in them that looked like desperate determination. Mother, Mud-scaled Dralith rose to her feet. This is impossible. This is a trick. The human has manipulated the child somehow. But the arbiter raised her hand for silence. And when she spoke, her voice was soft with wonder. The child has spoken, she said. And she has named the human as her mother. The hatchling was not finished. She turned and looked at the Dralith delegation, at the adults of her own species who had come to take her away. And Mira saw her small body tremble with fear. But she did not run, and she did not hide, and she did not stay silent. No, the hatchling said. And this word came easier, sharper, filled with all the terror and anger of a child who had been hunted since before she was born. No go. She turned back to Myra and reached up with her small clawed hands. And Mira knelt and scooped her up and held her against her chest as the hatchling buried her face in Myra's shoulder. Stay, the hatchling whispered, and her voice was clearer now, stronger now. Stay with Mira who fed me when I was alone. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Dralith delegation was shouting. demanding that the testimony be thrown out, insisting that the child had been coached or conditioned or somehow forced to speak. Before her time, the blood-scaled Dralith was on her feet, her eyes blazing with fury, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "This is an abomination," she screamed. "A human cannot raise a Dralith child. It goes against everything we are, everything we have ever been." But the Arbiter was unmoved. She waited until the shouting died down. And then she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of galactic law. "Dralith tradition states that the wishes of the child are paramount in matters of custody," she said. "This tradition exists because your species has always believed that children know their own hearts better than adults can know them." She looked at the blood-scaled Dralith, and there was no warmth in her eyes. "You cannot invoke tradition when it serves you and discard it when it does not," she said. "The child has spoken, and she has chosen. She is too young to choose." The blood-scaled Dralith snarled. "And how did she speak?" the Arbiter asked simply. "If she was too young to speak, how did she find the words?" There was no answer to that question, because the answer was obvious to everyone in the chamber. The child had spoken because she needed to speak, because the stakes were too high and the danger was too great. And the only person who had ever shown her kindness was about to be taken away from her forever. She had spoken because Myra had given her something worth speaking for the Arbiter, made her ruling the hatchling would remain in Mira's custody under the protection of the Galactic Compact, and the Dralith Remnant Council would have no authority over her unless she chose to seek them out when she reached adulthood. That was not the end. The Arbiter also ordered an investigation into the death of Kisara, based on testimony that Myra had provided about the Purifier faction and their hunt for the child. The blood-scaled Dralith tried to leave the chamber, but station security blocked their path, and within an hour she was in custody. And within a day she had confessed to ordering Kisara's murder. The other Purifiers scattered like shadows before the light, but they could not hide forever, and one by one they were found and brought to justice. Over the following months, Myra watched it all happen from a distance. Because she had more important things to worry about, she had a daughter to raise. The hatchling grew stronger every day, her scales hardening, her wings developing, her voice becoming clearer as she learned more words and strung them together into sentences that made Myra laugh and cry and feel things she had never felt before. 6 months after the hearing, Myra received a message from the Dralith Remnant Council, not from the Purifiers, who were gone now, scattered and broken from the others. The ones who had watched a human raise one of their young and had seen something they never expected to see. They invited her to a ceremony on the Dralith homeworld, and when she arrived with her daughter in her arms, she found herself standing before a gathering of the oldest and wisest members of the species. They spoke words in a language she did not understand, and they painted symbols on her skin with ink that glowed like starlight. And when it was done, the eldest of them all looked at her with eyes that held 10,000 years of history. "You are Mira Chun," she said, "first human keeper of the young, mother of the one who spoke, and from this day forward, you are Dralith in all ways that matter." Mira felt tears running down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Her daughter pressed against her leg and looked up at her with golden eyes, and spoke in a voice that was growing stronger every day. "Mother is crying," she said, and there was worry in her tone. "I am crying because I am happy," Myra explained. "Sometimes humans do that." Her daughter considered this for a moment, and then she nodded as if she understood. "I am happy too," she said. "Can I have a name now?" Myra knelt down and looked into her daughter's eyes, and she remembered the mother who had hidden this child to save her, who had died rather than let her be taken. "What name would you like?" she asked. The hatchling thought about it for a long moment, and then she smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Myra had ever seen. "Kes," she said. Like the one who hid me, and like the one who found me. Myra pulled her daughter into her arms and held her tight. And around them the Dralith watched in silence as a human and a dragon. Child made a family out of nothing, but love and courage and the simple willingness to care for someone who needed it. This was the story that spread across the galaxy in the months that followed. The story of a human intern who had seen something hiding in the darkness and had chosen to help rather than look away, and when other species asked what it meant to be human, the Dralith would tell them about Mira Chun, who had fed a stranger and spoken kindness into the darkness and had changed everything because of it. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, and they were not the oldest or the wisest or the most advanced, but they had something that no one else seemed to have. They had the ability to look at something that was not theirs and say, "This is my responsibility now," and that, more than anything else, was why the galaxy eventually came to welcome them, not because they were powerful, but because they cared.